Let me take you back to the moment my life unraveled, a moment I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try. It all started in college, where dreams were big and trust felt unbreakable. Mia and I met during our sophomore year in an econ class, and from the beginning, she seemed like someone who had it all together: smart, confident, and effortlessly put together. Meanwhile, Luke, my best friend since high school, was the polar opposite of me: charismatic, smooth-talking, and always ready with a joke or plan. Together, the three of us built something incredible, a tech startup born out of late nights, shared ambitions, and relentless determination, or so I thought. At first, everything seemed perfect. We worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of energy into turning our vision into reality. Mia handled operations, Luke took care of business development, and I focused on coding. The synergy between us felt unstoppable, or at least that's what I believed. But cracks began to form beneath the surface, subtle at first but impossible to ignore as time went on. Late-night texts became more frequent, inside jokes excluded me entirely, and excuses about work meetings grew increasingly vague. I told myself I was overthinking things. After all, these were the two people I trusted most in the world. How could they betray me? But then came that night, the night everything changed forever. I was tidying up the living room while Mia showered when something caught my eye: a small wrapped gift tucked under the couch cushion. Curiosity got the better of me, and as I peeled back the wrapping paper, my heart sank. Inside was a delicate bracelet, far too elegant to be anything Mia would normally wear. And then I saw the tag, written in handwriting I recognized instantly: "Can't wait to see you wear this." My stomach churned as realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just some innocent gift exchange, it was evidence of betrayal staring me in the face. Still reeling, I decided to dig deeper. Later that week, I stumbled upon Mia's laptop left open on the kitchen counter. Against my better judgment, I clicked through her recent emails and found confirmation of my worst fears: flight bookings to another city, hotel reservations under fake names, and messages exchanged with Luke detailing their secret rendezvous. They weren't just sneaking around, they'd been planning entire trips behind my back. Each discovery felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. These weren't random encounters. They were calculated lies, woven seamlessly into the fabric of our lives. The betrayal cut deeper than words can describe. Every memory we shared now felt tainted, every laugh hollow, every promise broken. Here were the two people I loved most in the world conspiring against me, not just emotionally but logistically. Their deceit wasn't spontaneous, it was premeditated, deliberate, and cruel. And yet, even amidst the chaos, one question haunted me more than any other: how long had they been doing this? Days, weeks, months. The uncertainty gnawed at me, amplifying the pain tenfold. The day everything unraveled was supposed to be a triumphant one. I had spent weeks preparing for the investor pitch that could change our startup's trajectory forever. This wasn't just another meeting. It was the opportunity, our chance to secure enough funding to scale up operations and take the company to the next level. Normally, Luke would have been right by my side, his charisma lighting up the room as he sold our vision while I handled the technical details. But this time, things felt off. Both Mia and Luke insisted they were too busy with internal logistics to join me at the pitch. "You've got this," Luke said casually, brushing off my suggestion of teamwork like it was nothing more than an afterthought. Mia backed him up, claiming she needed to focus on finalizing budgets. At first, their absence gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. The stakes were too high to let anything distract me. When I walked out of that boardroom victorious, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I expected relief, not suspicion. But something about their excuses lingered in the back of my mind. Why hadn't they shown up? They'd always been there before when it mattered most. Determined to celebrate the win together, I stopped by our favorite coffee shop on the way back to the office. Armed with lattes and pastries, I imagined walking into the conference room to see their faces light up as I announced the good news. Instead, what greeted me was silence, and natural silence. I followed the faint sound of laughter down the hallway toward the conference room where they often held their so-called work sessions. As I stood outside the door, my hand hovered over the handle, hesitating. That nagging feeling in my gut tightened like a vice. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open without knocking and froze. There they were, Mia sitting far too close to Luke, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Their heads tilted toward each other, their body language screaming intimacy. For a split second, denial flickered in my mind. Maybe this was some harmless moment born out of exhaustion or stress. Then I saw it, the laptop screen glowing between them. What I read made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a casual document. It was a detailed plan titled Strategic Restructuring Proposal. Beneath that chilling header was a bullet point list outlining how to remove me from the company entirely. According to the document, recent project failures which I had worked tirelessly to salvage were being framed as my fault. Worse still, there were notes about dividing assets post-divorce, all neatly categorized under headings like equity distribution and financial settlements. My stomach churned as reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated sabotage. "What's going on?" My voice cut through the air, sharp enough to make them both jump. Mia sprang up, smoothing her shirt nervously, while Luke's usual cocky demeanor faltered. We weren't expecting you back so soon," Mia stammered, avoiding eye contact. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop, but not before I caught sight of timestamp dates stretching back months. Months during which they'd been plotting behind my back. I set the coffee tray down with deliberate calm, though inside, fury and disbelief warred for dominance. "Is this what you two have been doing all this time? Sneaking around, planning how to screw me over?" My tone was icy, each word landing like a hammer blow. Mia glanced at Luke, clearly seeking guidance, but even he seemed shaken. Finally, she sighed, shoulders slumping as if surrendering to inevitability. "Look, this isn't how we wanted you to find out," she began, her voice trembling yet oddly detached. And then it poured out, the truth I'd been dreading but somehow already knew. They admitted to seeing each other for months, sneaking away under the guise of work meetings. What started as late-night brainstorming sessions had morphed into something deeper, something toxic. According to Mia, it just happened, as if that absolved them of responsibility. Luke chimed in, attempting to spin their betrayal as unavoidable fate. "It's complicated, man," he muttered, his voice hollow. "Complicated? No, it was cruel, calculated, and now undeniable." The days that followed the confrontation in the conference room were a blur of anger, disbelief, and suffocating despair. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things or demand explanations. Instead, I packed a bag in silence, my hands trembling as I shoved clothes into a duffel bag while Mia and Luke stood frozen in the doorway, watching me like strangers. Their expressions shifted between guilt and something else. Was it relief? It was as if they had been bracing for a fight, expecting me to lash out, but my calmness unnerved them. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. Without a word, I walked out of the apartment, leaving behind not just the life we'd built together, but also the company that had once been my dream. That night, I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room smelled of mildew, and the flickering fluorescent light above the bed buzzed incessantly, but I barely noticed. My mind was a storm of memories and accusations, replaying every moment I hadn't seen coming, the late-night texts, the inside jokes, the vague excuses. Each one now felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. Sleep eluded me. When exhaustion finally pulled me under, nightmares took its place. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, images of Mia and Luke laughing together haunting me even in my dreams. The weeks that followed were worse. I filed for divorce without contesting anything, not the apartment, not my share of the company, nothing. Let them have it all, I thought bitterly. What did any of it matter anymore? On paper, I acted like I didn't care, but inside, I was unraveling. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it felt like my entire identity had been stripped away. For years, my life had revolved around to people who had turned their backs on me so callously. Every reminder of them, their voices, their faces, the life we'd shared felt toxic. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. Then came the darkest period. Depression hit me like a freight train, relentless and unyielding. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything beyond surviving each day. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with thoughts of worthlessness and regret. One particularly bleak evening, sitting alone in that dingy motel room, I found myself staring at a bottle of pills, wondering how easy it would be to end the pain. The thought terrified me, but it lingered, whispering promises of peace. Thankfully, something deep inside screamed louder, a faint voice reminding me that this wasn't who I was. The next morning, I dragged myself to a therapist's office, desperate for help. Therapy became my lifeline, though progress was slow and painful. My counselor helped me confront the depth of my grief, teaching me coping mechanisms to manage the overwhelming emotions. Still, healing felt impossibly distant. To make matters worse, I was broke. With no income and dwindling savings, I moved to a different city, hoping distance would dull the ache. The studio apartment I found was cramped and grimy, with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet that dripped incessantly. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor, a folding table, and a chair scavenged from the curb. It wasn't much, but it was mine a fresh start, however fragile. During the day, I worked at a local coffee shop, serving lattes and cleaning tables for minimum wage. Customers came and went, oblivious to the turmoil raging inside me. At night, I returned to my tiny apartment, collapsing onto the mattress, too drained to do anything but stare at the ceiling. Yet, amidst the chaos, a spark of determination began to flicker. I refused to let Mia and Luke define the rest of my life. This was my chance to rebuild, not just financially, but emotionally. And though the road ahead seemed insurmountable, I vowed to take it one step at a time. The months that followed my departure from the startup were a blur of survival and self-reconstruction. I found myself working at a small coffee shop during the day, pouring lattes for strangers who had no idea what I'd been through. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills barely. Nights, however, were different. While most people unwound with Netflix or social media, I retreated into the dim glow of my laptop screen, determined to build something entirely my own. The idea had been simmering in the back of my mind for years: a mobile payment app tailored specifically for small businesses, something seamless, affordable, and scalable. Back when Luke dismissed it as too niche and too risky, I let it go, burying the concept deep inside me. But now, with nothing left to lose, I poured every ounce of energy into making it real. At first, progress was agonizingly slow. My second-hand laptop, a relic from my college days, sputtered under the strain of running complex coding programs. It would freeze mid-task, forcing me to restart hours of work. Sometimes, it wouldn't turn on at all, leaving me staring at its lifeless screen in despair. On top of that, I couldn't afford to hire anyone to help, not even a freelancer. Every dollar I earned went toward rent, utilities, and the cheapest instant noodles I could find. Sleep became optional, caffeine became essential. My apartment was a mess of crumpled receipts, empty coffee cups, and scribbled notes scattered across the folding table that served as my desk. Then came the hackers, a nightmare I never saw coming. One night, after weeks of painstaking development, I logged onto my system only to discover that everything was gone. All my test data, algorithms, and prototypes had vanished without a trace. Panic surged through me as I realized someone had breached my server. A message flashed on my screen: "Pay up, or your project dies." They demanded an exorbitant ransom, knowing full well I couldn't afford it. For hours, I sat there paralyzed, wondering if this was the end. Everything I'd worked so hard to create stolen by faceless criminals who thrived on exploiting vulnerability. I didn't pay them. Instead, I spent days rebuilding what little I could salvage, starting over from scratch yet again. As the months dragged on, doubt began creeping in. Was this really worth it? Had Luke been right all along? Maybe the idea was too narrow, too ambitious for someone like me. The weight of failure loomed heavily over me, threatening to crush whatever fragile hope remained. By the time winter rolled around, I was down to my last few dollars. The heat in my apartment barely worked, and I wrapped myself in blankets while typing furiously, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in my stomach. One particularly bleak evening, as I stared at lines of code that refused to compile, I seriously considered giving up. What was the point of fighting so hard for something that might never succeed? But then fate intervened in the form of a chance encounter. A customer at the coffee shop struck up a conversation with me one afternoon. He was older, dressed sharply in a suit, and carried himself with an air of authority. When he asked what I did outside of serving coffee, I hesitated before mentioning my up. To my surprise, he seemed genuinely intrigued. "Mobile payments, huh?" he said thoughtfully, leaning back in his chair. "Tell me more." Over the next hour, I explained my vision, the simplicity of the platform, its potential impact on small businesses, and how it could revolutionize transactions. By the time I finished, he nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. 2 days later, I received an email from him. Attached was a proposal and investment offer that felt almost too good to be true. He believed in my idea enough to inject the capital I desperately needed to keep going. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a surge of determination. This wasn't just about proving Luke wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could rise from the ashes of betrayal and loss. With renewed vigor, I dove back into the project, hiring a small team of developers and designers to bring my vision to life. Looking back, those early days felt like climbing a mountain in the dark, and sure, if there was even a summit waiting for me. But every late night, every setback, and every moment of doubt made the eventual triumph sweeter. And though I hadn't forgiven Mia and Luke or myself, I knew I was finally on the path to redemption. As my company soared to new heights, the universe seemed to have a cruel sense of humor when it came to Mia and Luke. Their once promising startup, the very business we had built together, began unraveling in spectacular fashion. At first, I tried not to pay attention. After all, why should I care about their failures? But whispers started reaching me through mutual acquaintances, each story more damning than the last. It wasn't just bad luck, it was a slow-motion implosion fueled by poor decisions, arrogance, and greed. The first blow came when their product launches flopped one after another. Investors who had initially been dazzled by their charm began pulling out, citing missed deadlines and underwhelming performance metrics. The cash flow dried up almost overnight, leaving them scrambling to keep operations afloat. Desperation seeped into every decision they made, turning what was once a thriving venture into a sinking ship. Then came the scandal that sealed their fate, a bombshell accusation that sent shockwaves through the industry. Luke had allegedly embezzled company funds to cover his mounting personal debts. It turned out that Luke's extravagant lifestyle had caught up with him. He'd been living far beyond his means, racking up credit card bills and gambling losses he couldn't afford. To make matters worse, Mia had knowingly signed off on some of these transactions, either out of loyalty or sheer denial. When the board discovered discrepancies in the financial reports, an internal investigation revealed a trail of deceit so blatant it left no room for excuses. Luke was swiftly ousted from his leadership position in a humiliating public vote, while Mia, once the organized backbone of our operation, was fired without ceremony for her complicity. Their fall from grace was swift and brutal. Overnight, they went from being celebrated entrepreneurs to pariahs within the tech community. Social media lit up with screenshots of leaked emails and receipts detailing their mismanagement. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be tainted by association. Without income or savings, they were forced to sell their house, a sleek modern home they'd proudly purchased during their peak, to settle mounting legal fees and unpaid taxes. They moved into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town, relying on handouts from family members just to survive. Watching their descent felt surreal. These were the same people who had betrayed me, dismantling everything I held dear for their selfish desires. Now, karma had come full circle, delivering a punishment as merciless as it was poetic. Yet, even as I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction, part of me couldn't help but feel pity. Their lives had unraveled completely, stripped bare of the illusion of success they'd clung to for so long. Every late-night meeting, every stolen glance, every lie, they had paid dearly for it all. But this wasn't just about revenge. For me, Their downfall served as a reminder of how fragile ambition could be when untethered from integrity. While I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, focusing on hard work and authenticity, Mia and Luke had let greed consume them. And now, they stood at rock bottom, staring at the wreckage of their choices. The day Mia and Luke walked into my company's office for their interview, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. It was almost poetic how fate had led them here, and knowingly submitting their resumes to the very business they once dismissed as too niche and too risky. They thought they were applying to some promising tech startup, unaware that it was my empire, built from the ashes of betrayal and hard work. When HR forwarded their applications to me with notes about scheduling interviews, I didn't hesitate. This was an opportunity I wasn't going to miss. When they stepped into the interview room, neither of them expected to see me sitting at the head of the table. For a split second, their faces froze in shock. Mia's cheeks flushed red, while Luke's usual confident smirk faltered. "Luke, Mia," I greeted calmly, gesturing toward the chairs across from me. "Thanks for coming in." My tone was professional, almost indifferent, but inside, I could feel the weight of years' worth of unresolved tension simmering beneath the surface. As I began outlining the details of the position, a junior support specialist role, they exchanged uneasy glances. The job was entry-level, far beneath what either of them had grown accustomed to during their days at our old startup. But desperation has a way of humbling even the proudest individuals. Luke tried to recover first, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, sure. I wasn't expecting you to be here," he stammered, clearly thrown off balance. "Well, it's my company," I replied matter-of-factly, letting the words hang heavy in the air. "I like to stay involved." Mia fidgeted nervously with the edge of her portfolio, avoiding eye contact altogether. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the circumstances life had dealt her. Meanwhile, Luke leaned forward slightly, attempting to regain control of the situation. "This position seems a bit lower level than I anticipated," he said carefully, his voice laced with thinly veiled arrogance. "Oh," I responded coolly, leaning back in my chair. "Based on your recent history and the state of your last venture, this seemed like the right fit. Unless, of course, you think otherwise." Luke's face reddened, but before he could respond, Mia chimed in hesitantly. "We were hoping for something more aligned with our previous roles," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly, feigning consideration, "And fortunately, we don't have anything higher level available at the moment. But this position could be a great opportunity to rebuild." The emphasis on that final word wasn't accidental. Both of them flinched visibly, the subtext hitting home harder than any direct accusation ever could. Luke shifted uncomfortably in his seat, frustration bubbling just below the surface. As the interview dragged on, their answers grew increasingly disjointed, revealing how unprepared they truly were. By the time we reached the end, Luke looked like a man cornered, his pride bruised, and his options dwindling. After they left, I received an email from Luke later that evening, not a thank you note or follow-up, but a rant filled with accusations. He claimed I'd humiliated him, using the interview as a form of revenge. Worse still, he doubled down on his earlier audacity, insisting that he deserved recognition and compensation for allegedly contributing to the idea behind my app. His words dripped with entitlement, each sentence more absurd than the last. But it was his closing line that struck me the most. "You owe me for the opportunities I gave you when we started out." Reading those words, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or shake my head in disbelief. Did he really believe that? Or was this just another desperate attempt to salvage whatever scraps of dignity he had left? The aftermath of the interview left a bitter taste in Luke's mouth, but it wasn't enough to deter him from his delusional sense of entitlement. A few days later, I received an email that bordered on absurd, a desperate attempt to rewrite history and claim ownership over something he had once dismissed as worthless. In the email, Luke accused me of using the interview process as a form of personal revenge, twisting the narrative to paint himself as the victim. He even went so far as to demand recognition and compensation for allegedly contributing to the idea behind my app. "You owe me," he wrote, his words dripping with misplaced confidence. This company wouldn't exist without my input. I stared at the screen, torn between laughter and disbelief. The audacity was staggering. Here was Luke, the same man who had called my idea too niche and not worth the resources, now trying to stake a claim on its success. But this wasn't just about greed, it was about ego. His pride couldn't handle the fact that I had risen while he had fallen. Still, I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I dug through my old email archives, pulling up the exact thread where I'd pitched the concept to him years ago. There it was, the damning evidence, his dismissive response labeling the idea as impractical and unworthy of investment. It was all there in black and white, a testament to his short-sightedness. But Luke wasn't done yet. Emboldened by desperation, he decided to escalate things further, straight to court. Yes, you read that right. The man who had laughed off my vision as too risky now claimed that my entire empire was built on his intellectual contribution. The irony was almost poetic. As the news of the lawsuit reached me, I felt a mix of anger and amusement. Did he really think he could win? Did he honestly believe anyone would buy his fabricated story? When the day of the trial arrived, I walked into the courtroom armed with every piece of documentation I needed to dismantle his baseless claims. I brought copies of our email exchange, timestamps showing when I first started coding the app, and even testimonials from early users who remembered how rudimentary the prototype had been back then. Every detail painted a clear picture. This was my idea, my hard work, and my triumph. Meanwhile, Luke stumbled through his defense, clutching at straws and contradicting himself at every turn. His lawyer tried valiantly to salvage the situation, but the truth was undeniable. The judge wasted no time in delivering a verdict. "Mr. Luke Thompson," she said sternly, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the courtroom, "your actions demonstrate a blatant disregard for honesty and integrity. Not only have you failed to provide credible evidence to support your claims, but your accusations against Mr. Carter are entirely unfounded." She paused, fixing him with a piercing glare before continuing. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, and due to the frivolous nature of your lawsuit, you will also be held accountable for defamation and fraudulent misrepresentation." The room seemed to shrink around Luke as the weight of the ruling sank in. His face turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. For the first time, I saw cracks in his carefully constructed facade, the arrogance replaced by raw panic. The judge didn't stop there. She ordered him to pay substantial legal fees, not just mine, but additional penalties for wasting the court's time. By the time we left the courthouse, Luke was visibly shaken, his shoulders slumped under the burden of defeat. News of the ruling spread quickly, and soon enough, the tech community was abuzz with talk of Luke's downfall. What little reputation he had left crumbled overnight. Potential employers distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone embroiled in such scandalous behavior. With no job prospects, mounting debts, and crippling legal costs, Luke found himself teetering on the edge of financial ruin. The irony was cruel yet fitting. He had spent years chasing wealth and status, only to lose everything because of his own greed and dishonesty. As for me, the victory was bittersweet. Watching Luke's self-destruct was satisfying in a way, but it also served as a reminder of how fragile ambition can be when untethered from morality. While I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, focusing on authenticity and perseverance, Luke had let his ego consume him. Now, he stood stripped bare, a cautionary tale of what happens when hubris overrides integrity. Years after the betrayal that shattered my world, I stood on a stage bathed in bright lights, addressing an audience of hundreds at one of the largest tech conferences in the country. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, once the awkward coder who preferred solitude over socializing, now being hailed as a visionary entrepreneur. My journey had been anything but easy, and every step of it, the pain, the sleepless nights, the relentless determination was etched into my soul. As I adjusted the microphone and scanned the room, I could feel the weight of how far I'd come. This moment wasn't just about success, it was about survival. "I want to start by telling you a story," I began, my voice steady but tinged with emotion. "A story about betrayal, resilience, and the power of not giving up." The crowd leaned forward slightly, Their curiosity piqued. I recounted the darkest days of my life, the discovery of Mia and Luke's affair, the humiliation of losing everything, and the despair that nearly consumed me. But then, I shifted gears. What they did broke me, I admitted, pausing for effect. But here's the thing, sometimes, breaking is exactly what we need to rebuild stronger than ever. I went on to explain how those moments of devastation became the fuel for my transformation. Every late night spent coding in that dingy apartment, every rejection from investors, every doubt I faced, it all led me here. Betrayal can either destroy you or redefine you, I said firmly, letting the words sink in. It's not the fall that defines us, it's how we rise from it. The audience erupted into applause, many nodding in agreement. For them, this was an inspiring tale of triumph. For me, it was catharsis, a final acknowledgement that I had turned my greatest wound into my most powerful weapon. Meanwhile, Mia and Luke's lives spiraled further into obscurity. Once celebrated as rising stars in the tech world, they were now reduced to shadows of their former selves. After their failed lawsuit and mounting debts, they disappeared from public view altogether. Rumors swirled about their current state, working menial jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, and relying on handouts from family members just to survive. A mutual acquaintance confirmed that Mia was working as a cashier at a retail store, while Luke took shifts driving for a rideshare service. Their names, once synonymous with ambition and innovation, now carried whispers of failure and disgrace. The contrast between our trajectories was staggering. While I delivered keynote speeches and graced magazine covers, they struggled to make ends meet, their reputations irreparably tarnished. At first, I felt a pang of pity for Mia especially. She had once dreamed of building something meaningful, only to let greed and poor choices lead her astray. But as time passed, I realized that pity was misplaced. They had made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. Karma, as cruel as it was poetic, had written its final chapter for them. As I stepped off the stage that evening, surrounded by admirers eager to shake my hand, I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. Would I change anything if given the chance? Probably not. That betrayal, though devastating, had propelled me toward a destiny I never imagined possible. And as I glanced out the window of the conference center, watching the city lights flicker like stars, I knew one thing for certain: life has a way of balancing the scales. For Mia and Luke, those scales tipped irrevocably downward. For me, they soared higher than I ever dreamed.